up and try again.
I think one of the important aspects in programming is the Java documentation or the documentation in general. Since we're working with Java, it makes sense to say Java documentation. And the reason why is because at some point you will generate thousands of lines of code in your software, in your programs. And when a software developer or a software engineer will try to work with your programs, it will be difficult to go and jump directly to your code. Who wants to jump into that pool of thousands of lines of code? Instead, they want to read the manual, right? Of course, the manual, you will have to create it. So Java supports three types of comments. The single line of comment is when we usually use for declaration of variables, just a small description about what that line of code performs. The multi-line, which basically provides you maybe a little bit more elaborate description about what this piece of code performs. And JavaDoc. That JavaDoc is the third way that Java provides you this ability to provide a description, a long description. So software engineers or any user of programming can basically have an idea what this software is doing. In other words, your programs. There is a list. There's a big number of tags available for you to use in Java, and here is the link so you can see it. For the sake of this course, we're gonna use just a limited one, just some of them that you can use in order to suggest what kind of return statement you can use, name of the parameters and what they really are. Maybe throws is an important one to identify what this method will give you back in case something goes wrong. And I think that's pretty much what we're going to cover for this one. So let's go ahead and describe how to develop documentations per method. And I will show you how to generate an HTML will serve as a JavaDoc. Okay, thank you very much. Demonstrate JavaDoc by basically documenting three methods, as you can see here. One is called division, that one is print reverse, and the last one is called find total. So I'm going to show you how to generate JavaDoc by using the tags from Java. And then I'll show you how to basically invoke the Java documentation comment through the terminal. Okay, I'm going to give a couple steps for those. So let's first start with comment on division. So if you can see, division takes two values, x and y, and basically the only thing that we're doing here is dividing x divided by y and giving immediately the result. We're expecting a double, which makes sense because a double divided by a double, x divided by y, it will give you a double. So here it's consistent with the operations we're performing on line 7. So what we're going to do here, we're going to give documentations. Notice that we're not interested at this point to check the validation of the method. We only care about the documentation at this point. So I'm not going to use the main to test it, although you can trust me that this should work. But we want to generate the Java documentation. That's the only purpose. So the first step is to do the comment, right? So JavaDoc starts with a / and star. Notice that here it changed the color of most of the code because everything is a comment. But when you have only one single line of code, that is multi-line comments. JavaDoc, you require 2 stars. I don't know, automatically here it generates an autocomplete from code. It's telling me, you know what, you're probably using Java comment, and here's a couple of elements that you will require. So this is a fancy editor that I have right now called Code that automatically identify how many parameters I need. For example, I need param X, param Y, and I need a return. And you know what? I'm going to hit enter just to autocomplete that part, just to identify that part. Notice that here this code generates these tags automatically. So add param basically tells you that you need X, and indeed we need X, as you can see in line 11, and also Y. Yeah. So, and also it tells you a return. but there's no description here. So maybe it's important to have some small description like this. This method performs a division between x and y, both double values. Something very simple, very generic as well, but simple, right? So x, you probably want to give some description, right? So variable containing maybe something more general, like a double variable, and y is a double variable, because both of them are doubles data types. Yeah. So returns is a small description as well, saying something like a result containing the division of x and y. Yeah. So very generic description. Yeah. That kind of makes sense for this one. Let's try to do print reverse. Notice the print reverse, you give a string, and basically we use this loop in order to go from the very last element all the way to 0. We decrement, and in the meanwhile we print just the characters of position I. Notice that here is a void method, so the only difference between the previous method is that we have a return. Here is a void. Let's see what this editor performs or suggests us when I create JavaDoc. Here he says, you know what, I'm only going to suggest the parameter that you provide. And sure, fair enough. Let's do it. Small description won't hurt. So what we can say is something, this method will take a string s as a parameter, and it will print in reverse order. Yeah, string s, a string which order will be print in reverse, and that's it, right? Because we don't have a return. This is a void method, so sure, why not, right? So here's the second description of the method. And let's do the third one. 2 stars. And here the code is giving us this suggestion to have 2 tags for the parameters, S and C, and a return statement. Sure, why not? I mean, notice that here I'm using the suggestions that this code is giving to me, but you can also do it your own, right? It's just the @ sign and then param, yeah, and then the name of the parameter. So find total, basically you have a string s and a character c. Basically you find how many elements in the string s matches with the value c. So this is what we have here in this loop, and we need an if statement. Sure, why not? So the description looks like this. This method will count the number of occurrences of c in the string s, maybe of the character in the string s, sure. And then string s is the parameter, which basically says string containing multiple characters, and c is the target interested to find occurrences. I think I miss an E here. Okay, and return is, it will return an integer representing the total number of times the character C appears in string S. Okay, so notice that I just generate the documentation for those 3 methods. So the next thing is to generate those documentations, and what we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you my desktop. So my desktop, the only thing I have here is just a folder called summer 2020 and the file that I just basically create my method with the Java documentation. There's nothing else in my desktop, as you can see. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna show you how to do it through the terminal, how to run the JavaDoc code. Remember, ls will display how many elements we have here. As I show you, summer 2020 is one of the folders I have there, and documentation example.java. That's it. Now, I want you to pay attention what I'm gonna do. So if I type JavaDoc, yeah, that is the command to generate the documentation of a given file. It's very similar like Java C, that's for the compiler. JavaDoc is to generate the documentation. Of course, the file that I want to generate is called documentation example.java. I can do this, yeah, without any problem, but check what's gonna happen in my desktop after I generate this. So here we'll show you all the practices that basically generates all those files. But notice my desktop now. Yeah, it generates a bunch of files here. So probably you already have enough files in your desktop, so this will basically create even more. So that's not very practical. So I'm just gonna delete this everything. I'm gonna show you a trick. I just delete it. I'm gonna clear my screen. And the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create a directory, right? I think I show you how to make directories. I mean, you don't really have to go through the terminal. I just wanna show you here a command, mkdir, and I'm gonna put here documentation. Okay. If I go to my desktop, here is a folder that I just created in my desktop called documentation. So now I have summer documentation and the Java file documentation example. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna redirect everything that we're gonna generate in the Java documentation into this folder. I'm gonna show you how. So going back to my Java code, I'm gonna generate again the following: JavaDoc, and then you can type -d. This is basically a flag or an option that you are providing to the Java compiler or the JavaDoc command, saying, hey, I'm going to provide you a directory, yeah, where I want you to redirect everything that you're going to generate in JavaDoc into that directory. So here, you're going to type here documentation, which is basically the directory that I just create in the desktop. Notice that I am in the desktop, okay? So here, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna give a space, and then I'm gonna provide the name of the Java file, which is documentation example.java. After this, I'm gonna hit enter, and I want you to pay attention what's gonna happen. So I'm gonna hit enter, and it's generated the same documentation that I did previously. The only difference is that if I go to my desktop, notice that there's nothing in my desktop. Everything is being packaged into this documentation folder. You can see everything has been redirected very nicely. And now you can see index.html. If I double click index.html, it will generate this document. Yeah, it's an HTML. You can see here the direction in the URL address. Yeah, this local. So it basically says users, my username, desktop. Here is everything that belongs to this particular directory. Now, let's explore a little bit here what's happening here. I think you're familiar to this type of documentation because in the past we have done this. We basically went to the Java API. It looks something similar because the Java API was generated by JavaDoc. So here it gives you something called construction summary. At this point, probably you don't know, but in the next videos, we're going to talk about object orientation and talks about construction. Yeah, we'll come back to this later on. And then we have the method summary. Here, it tells you that you have four methods because it's divisions, find total, main, believe it or not, this one of the methods, and print reverse. So basically, look how nicely Java generates this documentation. Is the name of the method, the possible. This is called the method header. Probably you remember this from the lecture. And then some description that we provide. Yeah, I didn't have the description for the main, and that's because I didn't think it was kind of important, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should put some description here. And then it gives you some format here or some kind of suggestion. It basically tells you something about methods that you inherit from the class object. We're going to talk about this in object orientation programming later on. And then we don't have any description, but for example, here, when we click, actually, as a matter of fact, this is the nice thing about having JavaDoc here. If you click on the method, it will take you directly to the name of the method. Here it says, hey, the method is division. This is the header. Yeah, some description. This method performs a division between x and y, both double values. And here, parameters, x is a double variable, y is a double variable, basically returns the result containing the division of x and y. And then we also have print reverse, same description, and same description for find total. Pretty nice, no? I like it a lot. So this will give us a description, or whoever is trying to use your software, your programs, is basically, instead of just go to the implementation, it's going to come here and read this. Okay, you know what? I'm interested to use, I don't know, division, or maybe print reverse, maybe find total, without going to the details. So I know this method for sure is going to give me back an integer. I only need to provide a string s and a character c in order to make that happen. So it gives us a manual about how to use this program without going to the details of the programming aspect. Very nice. Now I want to incorporate something into our code. Let's go back to our code. So this is our code. And let me see division. So division, I mean, it's very simple, right? X divided by y, you just put in one line of code. But this will give us an exception. Now, exception, we're going to talk about that later on, but there's already a video for this. Please check the comments for the video. So this, in case you're interested about the exception, you can anticipate that. But division, there's a problem with division, right? So x divided by y, it will give you indeed a double, but division, when you divide a number by 0, there is a problem. Yeah, you cannot perform a arithmetic exception here. So you cannot divide by 0. It's one of the mathematical rules. So here we need to check if y is 0. So how do we do this in Java? We can do something like this. If y happens to be 0, then what we can do, we can throw new arithmetic exception. Cannot divide 0. Now, at this point of your education, you probably don't know what all this thing is, right? And that is okay, because you will see it later on. I can promise you that. But basically, you're checking if the value of the parameter y is 0, it happens to be 0, then you cannot throw, or you're going to report. This is what throw means, is reporting or stopping your program because you want to tell the user that there is an arithmetic exception. Here is a comment that you just put. You know what? You cannot divide by 0. So this is something that you are checking before we arrive to this point in throws. Now this exception is quite important. So what we can do, there is a tag for that in the documentation. We can put here at exception. I don't know if you noticed, there is an autocomplete, and this is the exception in case y is 0. So that will give you a more complete program, more robust program. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and save and generate the documentation again. And I'm going to go and open my HTML. So if I go here in division, so now the description division it has an additional tag called throws. By the way, you can use exception or throws. Both of them are synonyms. So basically, throws is the most basic way to do it. It throws an exception. We discussed that it will throw something arithmetic exception in case the value y is 0. So this is very handy because that will give us, or that will give to the computer user or the programmer some knowledge, yeah, a priority. So later on, we're going to talk about exception handling, and you will see how throws are quite important, to be honest. Throws basically gives your program more robustness and gives you more reliability just by telling the computer user what exactly your program is doing. And maybe it might happen the situation that these exceptions or throwing exceptions may occur in the code, so the user can anticipate these problems or handle these problems later on, perhaps in the main or something else. We're going to talk about Sandbox later on. That's where you use something called the try catch. And I think those it's important just to start to identify those situations. I think at this point you already know that, because when we talk about if statement, we validate. Also with while loops and do whiles, when we use loop validation, we kind of validate that. But here we're handling that situations. So again, let me just rephrase what we just learned today. Java provides Java documentation. This is by using the /**. This will automatically generate a documentation just by providing a description. It's a small description about what these methods perform. In the Java documentation, you have what we call tags. Tags like add parameters, add return, add exceptions, which allow us to basically provide description about the variables or the current parameters or returns, but in a more detailed part. Also, you give us this option to not provide a tag in case we have a void method. We don't really need that. And we can have multiple parameters, as we have discussed in different methods. So JavaDoc allows you to generate documentation for the computer programmer or the computer user to identify what are these parameters or return statements, instead of just going to the details into the implementations. So this concludes this description of Java documentation. In case you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. And I'll see you next time. Happy coding and happy documentation now. See you next time.